College of Medicine, faculty at the faculty of the College of Medicine, psychologist at Penn State Health, and I provide research with the ASSERT grant. So yes, I'm going to be talking about deciding to disclose a disability today. And moving on. So just some of the goals and objectives that I have for my presentation today. So starting off, I do want to just review and provide a basic understanding of the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. And then I want to discuss the considerations when deciding to disclose a disability to an employer. So just a brief disclaimer. So I am not a lawyer and this is not a legal consult. And my goal is just to provide some basic background information and thoughts regarding the decision to disclose. And if you do have specific circumstances or questions that you're dealing with, I would recommend seeking your own legal consult for that. So just to provide a very brief overview of the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. The ADA is a civil rights law that prohibits the discrimination against individuals with disabilities in many areas of public life, including jobs or employment, schools, transportation, and many public and private places that are open to the general public. And the purpose of this law is to ensure that people with disabilities have the same rights and opportunities as everyone else who perhaps doesn't have those disabilities or a disability. And the ADA was originally passed in 1990 by the Supreme Court. And since then, Congress has passed a series of amendments in 2008 to just broaden this definition of disability. And I'm sure that's something that will continue as we continue to see disabilities changing and how they look in the everyday landscape of our lives. So what is a disability according to the ADA? So an individual with a disability is defined by the ADA as someone who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. The person has a history or record of such impairment, or this is a person who's perceived as others as having such an impairment. Disability does not include non-chronic injuries or impairments like a sprained ankle or seasonal allergies. These are things that are chronic throughout the life. And so, as I mentioned before, the ADA provides just wants to ensure that people with disabilities have access to aspects of public life. And so to prevent the discrimination of people with disabilities, the ADA provides these titles that apply to many different situations that a person might encounter in everyday life. So there's 5 different titles. I'm not going to be going into all 5. I'm just going to provide a brief overview of the first one, employment, since that is the focus of our presentation. But you can see the 5 different titles. So employment, state and access to state and local government resources and services, ensuring public transit is available and accessible to individuals with disabilities, ensuring that businesses are open to the public, such as restaurants, hotels, retail stores, hospitals, gyms, that they have accommodations and accessibility to individuals with disabilities. And then the last one is telecommunications. So this is just ensuring that telephone companies provide services to allow callers with hearing or speech disabilities to be able to communicate. So let's talk about Title I, which is employment. So the ADA applies to employers that have 15 or more employees. This can include state or local government, employment agencies, and labor unions. So the ADA will not necessarily apply to like mom and pop shops that have maybe 1 or 2 employees. The employer has to have 15 or more employees. And basically, the general requirement of the ADA is that employers must provide people with disabilities an equal opportunity to both benefit from employment-related opportunities available to others, and also ensure that people with disabilities are able to perform the jobs that they need to. Equal opportunity can include things like recruitment, so ensuring that people of all ability levels are able to access recruitment, learn about it, the hiring process, making sure there's no discrimination that's occurring there, and that people are able to be hired even though they have certain abilities as long as they're qualified. Ensuring that people with disabilities are able to access certain promotions, again, as long as they qualify for that promotion. Ensure that training is accessible for individuals, that there is equal pay and there's no discrimination with pay, and then that there's equal opportunities for social activities. And again, the ADA ensures that specific requirements for individuals with disabilities to perform their job have equal opportunities to do that. So that would be providing reasonable accommodations, which we'll talk about on this next page. Sounds like this was kind of touched on the previous presentation, but just to provide a very brief overview of this. So reasonable accommodations defined by the ADA are any change in the work environment in the way that things are usually done that result in equal employment opportunities for an individual with a disability. So again, that could be the hiring process, but also ensuring that they're able to do the job that they need to the same as everyone else. So employers must make reasonable accommodations for applicants and employees unless it can show that the accommodation would cause an undue hardship on the operation of the business. And an undue hardship refers to excessive cost or substantial, extensive, or disruption in the fundamentals of the nature of the operation. So if these accommodations are really going to impact the operation of the business negatively, the employer can kind of make an explanation for why they might not be able to provide that accommodation. Also, and it sounds like the previous presentation might have touched on this, there are some benefits for employers for hiring employees with disabilities. This can include tax credit for these accommodations that they might be making for employees. And what is important to note is that an employer is not required to lower the quality or quantity standards in an accommodation. So this would be something like an employee can't just do less work or not come in as much as they need to. It's just being able to ensure that the employee is able to do their job the way that they need to, that kind of levels the playing field compared to other people without that disability. But employers are not required to provide personal use items such as glasses, hearing aids as accommodations. The employee has to provide that themselves. And so generally, it is the obligation of the employee to request the accommodation. The employer might not necessarily offer that accommodation, even if the disability is disclosed. The employee has to kind of communicate and advocate for themselves, which could be a very difficult thing. But I believe that someone is going to be covering that today. So let's talk about this decision to disclose, which can be a very, very difficult decision for individuals with disabilities because there are a lot of pros and cons with this decision. And so something to consider is a person's disability visible or invisible? Because some people may have that ability to hide or conceal an aspect of their disability. So for instance, I work with individuals with autism, individuals who have maybe a more like less support needs, so more that like quote unquote mild autism, or what we refer to as level 1 in the autistic community. They might be able to hide that. They might blend in or mask really well, that employers might not be able to tell that they have autism, but some people with autism might not be able to hide that disability, maybe in their speech production or in some of the body movements that they have, or some of the things that they communicate. They might not be able to hide that as much. Another visible disability could easily be someone like missing a limb or in a wheelchair, those kind of things that we think of as like a typical, like stereotypical disability. But some people can certainly hide their disability. That can include a number of mental health diagnoses as well as autism. But for those who have this invisible disability, which can certainly be a privilege, they might have a choice. Oh, excuse me, there's a typo on my page. So while employers are prohibited from directly asking any questions about a disability, it puts the onus on the employer, the applicant, to educate the employer about their disability. So if an employee decides to disclose, they might have to educate the employer about the challenges that they might experience or some of the benefits they might be able to provide the company. But that does provide some extra like mental burden that you might have to, then an individual might have to do. And also, if deciding to disclose, an employer might request medical documents to confirm that diagnosis. I know for myself, as someone that diagnoses individuals with autism, adults as well, I sometimes have to write like summaries to confirm that the individual does have an actual medical diagnosis of autism to confirm that. So let's discuss some of the potential benefits and potential consequences when deciding to disclose. So let's start off with some of the potential benefits. So there is protection from discrimination. If you do disclose your disability, you might be able to, if you're not performing your job like in the exact way without those accommodations, you might not be discriminated upon because you might be able to get those accommodations you need. It can also open up a world of support if you are lucky enough to work in an environment that is very supportive of different ability levels. Being able to have those conversations, having people understand that empathy, maybe connecting with others who can share kind of a similar experience, really can open up a world of support. And it's something that can be really beneficial to a person. It can also provide those accommodations. If we disclose the disability, then we might be able to access those reasonable accommodations that might help perform the job successfully. And then a person might be able to live more authentically and bring more of their own whole self into their work. So, for instance, when working with individuals with autism, they might mask or feel like they have to hide some of their aspects of themselves, like self-soothing aspects. So maybe like having a fidget object that they need, or if they need to like move their body in a self-soothing way, being able to do that in their work environment to just regulate themselves a little bit more can be very, very wonderful. And that could be really helpful because and we'll talk about this on the consequences, having to hide that aspect of yourself can create a lot of excessive energy, mental burden. Disclosing and opening up about disability might reduce the physical and mental burden of hiding that disability. So, kind of like I was just saying, it can cause a lot of mental energy to hide that disability. And that can create a lot of additional mental health stresses and physical consequences to a person's life. We know that stress can worsen mental health conditions and can also worsen physical health conditions. And it could be really empowering to self-advocate, to be able to communicate maybe some of the limitations or different abilities that a person might have and educate others so that they can also learn and be supportive. Being able to advocate for yourself, tell people what you need can also be very boosting of your self-esteem, can build your confidence in your work environment. It can definitely create a lot of positives. So there are a lot of benefits to disclosing a disability, but this is a very difficult decision because every employer and situation can be so unique and not always the most positive if disclosing. So let's talk about some of the potential consequences. So again, it can take a lot of emotional energy hiding one's disability. So just to give an example, again, working with autistic individuals, I've heard that like at the end of the day, if they've been hiding some of their, or we call it masking in the autism world, masking some of their behaviors, they come home at the end of the day and they just crash. They might just like sleep, or they need to just lie down or not talk to anyone, or they can't take care of themselves in the way they need to. So it can really take a lot of emotional energy to hide that disability. Um, if we do disclose a disability, and depending on the workplace or the people that you work with, your coworkers, there can be overt and covert discrimination. So overt discrimination can be people saying rude and difficult things, picking, teasing, those kind of things. Covert discrimination can be like microaggressions or treating people almost like a child at times, even though they feel like maybe they're doing a nice thing, they might be treating the person in a way that just doesn't feel true for them. And that's something that can happen. Treating people with disabilities as more younger or like a child. Being able to negotiate for accommodations can also be very, very difficult. As I mentioned, disclosing the disability and then asking for the accommodation is the responsibility of the employee. So being able to try and negotiate for accommodations can be difficult, kind of going back and forth of what the employer can and can't do and what would be helpful for you. So that could be really hard. Especially if your disability is something that you don't necessarily feel as confident about because maybe you've had difficulties in the past with people being discriminatory. It can be hard to ask for certain things. And also, Again, needing to educate the employer on your specific disabilities and limitations can require a lot of effort and energy and assertiveness and confidence that can be really, really hard and draining to do. And if you do disclose and have to educate, the employer might have a very narrow understanding of a certain disability. I'm sure, maybe even for some people in here, when I say the term autism, you might have like kind of an image of what you think an autistic person looks like. But we know that their autism spectrum is a spectrum, and we see such a range of presentations. Um, just as if we were going to say depression, someone might think of depression as like, just having a bad day. I'm just feeling down and depressed. I'm feeling blue. But depression can also be very debilitating. So, depending on a person's perspective of a diagnosis, that can really shape how the employer or coworkers treat that person, or the access to accommodations a person might be able to get. Um, Also, disclosing a disability can limit a person's privacy. Having to share a medical or psychiatric diagnosis about yourself, it is your privilege and your right, but it does open up a world of vulnerability about yourself, depending on how the employer views it. And then also, disclosing this can cause some worry about others' perceptions of you. Again, depending on each person's view of that specific disability, or even the thought of disclosing a disability, everyone's going to have different perceptions. So it can create maybe some anxiety or worry about what other people think. So it is a very difficult decision to disclose. And so again, it's something that's very personal, and there's never a right or wrong decision. It really depends on the person and what that person feels comfortable doing. The decision to disclose can be influenced by several factors, including personal preferences, how the person feels about their disability, disclosure, what they need, the culture, the climate of the employer or the company, how they view disability, accommodations that might have been given or not given in the past, and then the person's own mental well-being. So a lot of decisions go into this. It's not a very easy thing to do. So that's why it could be really useful to consult with a trusted other, either a friend, a family member, someone that maybe has experience doing this, maybe consulting legal consult to get another person's perspective, to decide if you're going to disclose a disability with an employer. So it is not an easy decision. Hopefully this has brought more thoughts for you in terms of like the decision to disclose, or what goes into it for a person with disabilities to disclose. It certainly is a difficult thing to do. And so just a couple different references and resources. So here, and if you have access to these slides, which everyone should, you'll be able to see the link to the Americans with Disabilities Act, and an overview. I found that there's a couple different helpful resources to understand the ADA. I found a wonderful New York Times article that I think was terrific, that explains both sides of the decision to disclose. That could be really helpful in making that decision when thinking it through. And then there's a wonderful research article. I know it's a little bit out of date, but I just thought that it's older than 20 years, which in the research world we usually don't necessarily like to encourage. But I did think this was an excellent article, and really brings into the perspective of like what goes into a decision and how employers might think about it. And that is it. I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has any, or any thoughts or anything like that.
So if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat box.
I'm just looking at the chat here to see if there was anything for me that I could answer.
We will be making slides available on our website afterward.
I do see a question about what about if the number of employees is over 15, but full-time is less than 15 and the others are part-time? That is an excellent question. I am actually not sure about that. I'm sure that those resources that I put for the ADA would be helpful. And my guess is that like full-time or part-time might not necessarily matter. I think maybe 15 is 15. If anyone else is familiar with that, maybe you can jump in as well.
Just waiting to see if anybody has any more questions. If you have a question, don't be shy. Someone else might have the same question.
You see, should an individual avoid business with less than 15? Um, I think that's gonna be a very like individualized decision. I'm sure it depends on a lot of factors like what the company is, like the stability, pay, their comfort the with the employer. I feel like I wish it was an easier answer. I feel like it's such a specific question to the individual. So I'm sorry that I think that would be a question to kind of like think through with maybe a trusted other. And how do you coach an individual about when to disclose if they have a disability that can be hidden? Is it ever a good idea to disclose at the interview? That is also a great question. And again, I wish there was like a really simple answer for all of these because every company is and every person is so unique that like we just don't know how they might feel about it. I know that in some job applications, or if you are approved for a job, if you're hired or you get a job offer, there's an opportunity sometimes, depending on the company, to disclose if you have a disability. Again, according to the ADA, companies cannot discriminate on the disclosure of a disability, but we talked about all those negative consequences that could occur. And it really is up to the person. I know that when I've worked with several of my patients, they've questioned like, should I let them know at the interview? Should I let them know after I'm hired? And it's really up to them. We kind of think through the pros and cons. I've talked with an individual who was very adamant about disclosing at the interview because they viewed their diagnosis of autism as a positive, how they're very attentive to details. They're very like when they're working. They don't let a lot of distractions get in the way. So they felt that that was a positive, an aspect of their brain that they wanted to disclose. Some people want to get a sense of the company first and their comfort there before they do disclose. And if they need accommodations, maybe they won't need accommodations or know that they need accommodations until after they've started. So it's always worth talking about the pros and cons with the individual. Again, it's so difficult to like give a blanket statement because each person, each company, the coworkers are going to be so unique to each place. So it's really, really difficult. But being able to talk through these decisions is really important.
Dr. Hirsch, I'm just giving you the
Yes.
4-minute warning here.
Thank you so much. Thank
Yeah, we
you.
appreciate all your expertise. It's wonderful.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. I'm happy to talk about this. Um, let's see. Yes, the slides will be shared. I will put my contact information. I don't believe I put it on my slides, but I will put it in the chat to ensure everyone has it if you have any questions. Let's see. Is there any workarounds to help the individual maintain benefits and not reduce their work schedule? Absolutely. I think that's going to be something that the individual might have to, again, if they have someone that they can support, someone that's supporting them or they can talk through, they can definitely figure out like what's going to be helpful for them. So, if it's more like at the end of the day, they're going to do things that like a lot of self-care to ensure that they can rebuild their energy, or if they have to take like little breaks during the day to like rebuild their energy or do some of those self-soothing things, that could be really useful. Maybe it's if it's not necessarily wanting to reduce their work schedule, maybe it's trying to shift their like hours around of like when they work best if they have that flexibility. Um, it's really difficult though, because the employer cannot like reduce their work. It's just to ensure that they can do the work that they need to at the same level as everyone else who has a different ability or no disability. Um, just reading. Um, Oh, and I see someone has some resources for determining how to disclose, and that would be wonderful. I'd love to have that. Um, okay, great. I think those are all of the questions in the chat. Did anyone else have any other questions? Happy to, and I will put in my email. I'm gonna put in. I have two emails that go to the same place. I'm gonna put in the shorter one because the other one is epically long. It's like pennstatehealth.edu. It's just really long. So I'll put in my PSU email. So it's just KHH 13 at psu.edu. And please let me know if anyone has any questions. Also, if you're curious about, like, again, I specialize in autism. I work in the Division of Autism at Penn State. So if you have any questions about autism, the spectrum of autism, diagnosing autism, please let me know. I love to help with that. I diagnose individuals pretty much across the lifespan, usually around 3 and up. I just diagnosed someone that was 70 the other day. So I'm also happy to answer questions about that if you're curious. Looks like Diana is trying to speak and oh, now she's muted, but I will.
If she's, I'll go ahead and move us along. Thank you so much,
Perfect.
Dr. Hirsch, for
Yes, my
being
pleasure.
a part of today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.